I did think of a topic that we could dive into, and maybe we could do that for a short time or whatever. But I thought it would be really interesting to hear from people like what they would appreciate in a podcast featuring you. So
Uh,
we could do that for the second half, or however you want to do it.
whatever seems to be live and vital is good.
Okay.
So,
Let's just dive into this real quick because I actually had a question for you. So in one of the other dialogues that we had, the question came up about just the general tendency of, I would say, a basically a current in the culture to look to an authority
hmm,
to validate our experience, get information, become part of a group. And one of the things that seemed to have come up in the whole conversation that we had was, what if we actually just, kind of like how you've presented it, like that we're all bearers of some form of wisdom or connection or whatever, and why is it that we tend to, like, say, put somebody into an authoritarian position over our own experience, our own um, understanding.
yeah. So I think part of this comes from our relationship to our own mind, and that is that we look to the ideation that's arising as if it's representing reality, and so that notion, which has some practical application, kind of excludes a whole range of the human experience. So once I say, okay, my mind is the thing that's defining my life, then I start to look for how to make that a stronger or more complete um, attribute. And so this is where the sort of the intellectual dominance comes in, and with that, the I don't know, authoritarianism is a kind of a broad word, but um, it's not a diffuse intelligence. So, in other words, an intelligence that is inclusive of the intellect, but also of the emotional, the psychological, the spiritual, if you can use that term, the energetic, the somatic, the unseen. Most of the world is something we can't even get to.
Right.
So, there's a whole universe of the unknown, which science is trying to get to, but science can't get to the thing it can't see, right? We can't get to the thing we can't see. So there's a very big space there of that's very inclusive, and we carve out of that this intellect, and we can look to people who have a strong intellect, which is largely in history been men. So you get this kind of bifurcation of the human experience. So I think that's what you're pointing to. In that world where we can't be certain because we don't have the ability to know. We're always in the unknown, and we're in resistance to that because really, who wants to be in the unknown? The unknown looks like death essentially. Then we seek for certainty, and certainty comes with authority, you know.
And
So
would you say that there's an element of, kind of like a fallback to safety and security, like I'll give up my sense of what I think is, my values, or, my particular perspective on the world or whatever, in exchange for someone else keeping me, in quotes, safe.
yeah, well, this is again the relationship to our own mind.
Right.
Like, what am I giving up to contain myself within the conceptual framework that, is the aggregate of my conditioning, my genetics, my education, my, childhood.
Right.
Those are all containers. And there's a great deal that's outside of those containers.
Right.
Why do I, you know? what I'm giving up for the security of that structure is everything else, you
Right. So
know?
let's talk about the everything else. Because what if one placed oneself into the safety of everything else?
It's not safe.
What's
And
not
it's,
safe about it?
well, from the perspective of the structure of the self, which is um, this notion of center that's built out of that conceptual framework, the unknown, the everything else, is undermines that safety. So it looks like a very unsafe space. That's why I will stay inside that, and I'll try to build my relationships in a way that reinforces that and doesn't challenge it. So that's the again, I mean, you can take this into like the political realm and look at what happens in authoritarianism. I give up my freedom. I give up, my neighbor, for that matter, in exchange for the strong man that's going to protect me from the imagined invader or the economic dislocation or whatever it is. So it's sort of the same thing. I'm
Right.
giving up something and I'm getting this so-called security. But when you get what you want, you get what you don't want. So when you get, the authoritarianism of a political structure or of my own mind, I'm losing the connection with the rest of it.
Hmm.
So how do we, I mean, I think your question implies how do we enter into something which is inherently unsafe or unknown and therefore appears to be unsafe?
Yeah, that is my question. Because there's various models for these kinds of things, right? Like there's like your comfort zone, and then there's like the danger zone, and then
Mm-hmm.
somewhere just outside of the comfort zone is like a place where it's not comfortable to move, but it's not life threatening to move.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, can that comfort zone then expand into that, I don't even know what we're going to call it, the possibility zone? And is
Mm-hmm.
that something that could be, you know expanded through experience? Like
Mm-hmm.
like when you're a kid, you put your toe in the water and you go, oh, okay, I could put my toe in the water, that feels
Mm-hmm.
okay. And then what happens if I just go stand in the water, and
Mm-hmm.
and pretty soon I'm like splashing around like a fish, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, this is the question of incrementalism versus, like jumping into the unknown.
Yeah.
And I think that the case for incrementalism is what you just said, which is I can change a little bit. You know, I meet you, and rather than saying I love you and I'm in, I say I like you. Do you like to ski? That's incrementalism. It's like I'm going to see if you fit the picture of what I am, and the absolute is I'm in. I have no idea who you are or what you're going to present to me, but the desire for the connection of the unknown represents itself as you arriving in my life. So, it's a radical way of understanding the life that we live. But I would make this point, which is while we have this structure that says I know, and we're comfortable in that I know, the fact is that we can easily see is that we are embedded in the unknown all the time. It's not like we're really escaping the unknown by having this conceptual structure. We could, any one of us could die off this moment, right? It's like whatever structure we have, how much wealth we build, how many relationships we have, we're that close to oblivion. And so that oblivion is around us all the time. So I think the question you're asking is why can't we integrate that as our perspective? Why do we contain ourselves so thoroughly? And in that containing, we end up incredibly unhappy, incredibly shut down. And like the container, while it protects us, doesn't allow us to be fully engaged in the human condition. So I don't have an answer for like how that radical connection to the unknown takes place, because from my perspective, we're already there. So
Right.
this,
So then there's, the other way of looking at it, which, kind of lends itself to like modern spiritual psychological perspective, which is the idea is that if that is what you are, then the whole point is just to like, get rid of or let go of everything that you're not, which is, in quotes, the personality or the ego or the, conditioned
mm,
structure.
I
So
don't, yeah, I don't think
that
we're
would be more
getting,
like an implosion into like, letting
I
that.
don't, I don't think it's getting rid of it. Like we're all going to have personality. I mean, I think that's the fallacy of spirituality, is that you're going to like be in some kind of, la la land all the time, and personality doesn't, need to be there. I think we have personality. I think the question is like that I have personality and that I'm embedded in the unknown. How do I live? Like what is the how do we integrate this vast unknown area, all this moving energy, all the the psychological waves that come through us, and the structure of the conceptual world, in which some of us are very good at building bridges, or finding missing commas in a manuscript, or whatever the so we have all these attributes. And now the question is, not only how do I live, but how do we live?
Right.
And this is the invention both of a new way of living in that paradox individually. But I would say more interesting to me is not how I live, but how we live. And is there a cultural expression of that? And that, I would say, typically begins with the inner space that we can access, meaning the structure that I can see of personality, psychology, energy, the somatic space, all of which is really a structure of the imagination, you know, like the brain forms this notion of a body, but it's all happening in the synaptic structure deep within the brain that says, this is what my body looks and feels like. But we don't actually know what it actually is, right? So that's the space where we're investigating, let's say in meditation or just in the experience of life. But then we meet the other, the friend, the coworker, the lover, whatever. And now we have this transpersonal question that arises, which is, how do I move from this amazingly, let's say, confusing structure of how I think about and feel myself to how do we think about and feel each other? And then we happen to be embedded in a community. Now it gets really complex, you know, because you get into ideology, religious belief, all the rest of this stuff. So I think there's a vast amount of like integration and curious exploration there. I don't know that it's a collapse as much as it's like seeing all of that as one thing.
Yeah. Seeing it all as one thing.
Mm.
It's, that's easy to say, obviously,
I just said it. It was pretty easy.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I notice I say that too. It's, it's just all one thing, right? It's
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
one thing. It's all one thing happening, right?
Yeah.
Um, and then there's, the day-to-day, moment-to-moment challenge of actually living that, right?
Mhm.
Because even in this, we're not one thing. We're like one thing on the screen, right? Like your picture and my picture are on the same screen. We're not
Mhm.
even in the same town, but
Mhm.
on some level, it's all one thing happening, right? So
Mhm.
how, it becomes a little crazy making on some level, and you can understand how people like, dive very deeply into this, sometimes come out looking rather insane, right?
Mhm.
They,
Mhm.
according to, culture, right?
Mhm.
So the question is, is it actually more than just, meeting it moment to moment, or is there some larger movement afoot that's kind of like pushing us in that direction?
Yeah. Well, I think this is where location plays a big part, which is where am I asking that question from? So if I'm asking that question from this, like the individual body, mind, with my, survival instincts and all that, it's a different question than if I'm asking that question, let's say, from a relationship or from a community,
Right.
or from the unknown for that matter. Let's say all this, outside of all the structures, I locate myself in the vast Unitarian actuality, which is stripped of all concept. Now, those are easy words to say again, but there is a space that I think is available to all of us, which is that space. It just happens to take place in between the thoughts that we find so interesting. So it's like, when I have an argument with somebody, I'm so much more interested in my side of that argument than I am of theirs. If I become really interested in their side of the argument, there's no argument anymore because now curiosity has taken over conflict. And now I'm learning more about how they see the world. So in the same way, when I'm more interested in my thought structure than the space in which those thoughts arise, then I'm going to have, all the attributes of thought, which is me, you, subject, object. That's the nature of thought. But when I become really interested in the space, then suddenly I'm deeply listening to the whole.
Right.
And that's the access point that it doesn't take anything special to do that. It just happens to be the result of curiosity and interest.
Right. Well, that this brings me to I just finished reading this book, the latest book by Malcolm Gladwell called Talking to Strangers. And in that he posits three things. One is that as humans, as people living in community, we default to the truth. Like we just default to thinking that someone is telling us the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Because the opposite of that would be just basically being suspicious all the time, which is like hugely energy draining and doesn't create cohesion in a community. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the second thing is that we have this bias that we think we can read each other's physical selves, like I can read your eyes, I can read your mouth, there's like this whole science on like, what does this mean? And what
Mm-hmm.
does that,
Mm-hmm.
like there's this whole idea that somehow we can understand what's happening for another person by their effect,
Mm-hmm.
how they look. And
Mm-hmm.
then the third thing is something he calls coupling, which is that we don't really understand the context in which people are operating.
Mm.
So all of that together becomes this huge bias that we bring to any engagement. But what you're
Mm-hmm.
suggesting is to step out of that bias and be in this space of, I don't know, I wonder what's going on.
Yeah.
Maybe can
Yeah.
you tell me more?
Yeah. 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 Because those biases become the thing that we're then engaged with. And it's the filter through which we hear. And
Right,
so now I'm not hearing you, I'm hearing myself in my version of what all those attributes would be saying, thinking, doing, right? So this is, the difference between engaging and deeply listening.
right,
And so I think the term deep listening really means like letting my assumptions be quiet, letting my understanding be quiet, going to a more fundamental level of our perceptual field. And I think in that more fundamental level, we're actually synced up. Like our there's a quality in the human being. You could say it's mirror neurons or, there's some structure there where we start to our brains begin to sort of go in the same rhythm. And so that space, I think that deep listening space is where we start to find that our assumptions are not accurate. They don't tend to be accurate. They tend to be survival oriented. But survival at this point on this planet at this time is not an act of the individual. It's an act of the collective because we're going to burn ourselves up with, climate change and, all the rest of the stuff that's happening. So that's not something the individual is doing. It's something the collective is doing through this aggregation of assumption. And this is where ideology, where people are like, you know, bombing each other and, like World War I style trench warfare and, you know, crazy stuff that you can look at it and you can say, how does the human being construct a reality where this is the result? And if you start to reverse engineer it, you go back to this quality of disconnection through the belief in my assumptions. And then I gather my tribe with my assumptions, usually through grifting, I mean, this is the reality of most political leadership with a few exceptions. And you could say like Gandhi or Martin Luther King, had a quality which was, inspirational, the kind of the most expansive of the human being at that time. But most political leadership is a grift. It's a con. It's like tricking you, like finding your weak spot collectively, making a promise that we all know is not going to happen, and then gathering power from that. So this is, the human condition as it is now.
And yet, I think, what is it? They say hope springs eternal or something, like I think there is also this movement, this undifferentiated, no thing, all possibility movement that
Hmm.
is actually pushing us into some other expression. And we don't know what that is. And
Yeah.
we don't
Yeah.
know exactly how to do it. And yet there is this potential of staying engaged in the field, letting that inform whatever's, reality, whatever you want
Mhm.
to call it,
Mhm.
and seeing what's there. And I think that's what, Next Culture Network is really trying to hold, is that possibility.
Yeah, and I think it's a big challenge, in the live dialogue. So, it's been a pretty small group over the years, but now it seems to be swelling with, like new people and, people are syncing up pretty easily. And with that comes a kind of the arrival of a certain kind of narcissism and dissipation. And, in other words, as a group enlarges, it becomes more corrupted by the cross currents. And so I'm sitting there kind of sort of reflecting on my part of that. And do I need to like take on a more authoritarian um, stance to clean that up, to keep it in order, What do you think, Sapir? I think he's encouraging me to become an authoritarian a little bit, but I think so. That's it. And you think, I mean, I see that as kind of like a deeper evocation of that same quality. In other words, if in that space, which is designed to be paying attention to the transpersonal, like in that, you have to become authoritarian in order to deepen the transpersonal. We're just doing more of the same.
And but is it possible, is there the possibility that, we're each contributing as we're been formed to contribute, like we're not, while we're all the same one thing happening or
Mhm.
whatever, there are different flavors, there's different colors, there's different,
Yeah.
resonances that we're each embodying, right? And so if it potentially, if it was a space where everyone felt that their particular resonance or their particular contribution was needed and wanted, then it could just be respected around. And let's face it, you're an authoritarian person, like you
Mhm.
have that quality. I don't
Yeah.
necessarily have that quality. I'm like the rebel, poking, pokey, pokey,
Yeah.
pokey.
Yeah.
That's more my quality. And other people have Sapir is like a deep thinker and, you
Yeah.
know, is like kind of the naysayer to anything that might happen, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we each have those elements,
Hmm.
and somehow that makes a whole expression.
So I should be the best authoritarian I can be, is what you're saying.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, so that's interesting. And but I would say my that tendency also has the counterpoint to that, which is to question it,
Right.
question that structure. So
Well, isn't
that's,
that beautiful though, that the qualities come together, right? Like there's the,
mm,
like what do they say? It's like with great power comes great responsibility,
yeah,
like is being able to recognize those parts, and like for me, somebody who's like a pokey rebel, like what's the value of surrender?
yeah.
So like being able to embody those paradoxical elements, allows me then to contribute something that's a little more balanced.
Hmm. Yeah, well, that's still a work in progress,
Indeed.
Yeah,
Indeed. I don't know that it'll ever be done, right?
yeah, yeah,
Are we done now with
yeah,
this part?
yeah.
Seems like it.
Let's turn it over to the panel of experts here. So, I mean, we're sort of experimenting with the form a bit here. Like most podcasts are just recorded, canned, and then distributed on a schedule basis. But if there's something about the live quality that I really find important. But I think you had a question, Alex, for everybody. Like, what do they want here? Or can you?
Yeah, I think, in the spirit of ongoing collaboration, I'll borrow that word from Linda, is, just more inviting, I don't know, requests or comments or, you know, whatever it is that people might feel. I mean, I don't know if there was something that came up in what we were just talking about or something else you'd like to hear. Um, yeah.
Yeah, this whole topic of dialogues functioning without authorities, on the Saturday night, or for us it's Saturday night, for you guys it's Saturday morning dialogue, that's been a continuous sort of beat in the background coming from a few people. And I don't know, I just think it's a bit of a romantic thought to think that without somebody like Stephen, that it would be that just, I've got this sort of image of a tent pole holding the tent up, and that if Stephen wasn't there for an extended period, the tent would just collapse. Because essentially, you were talking about the intellect earlier. Stephen, there you are.
Mm.
You were talking about the intellect earlier, and I mean, the reality is that there is a requirement for people to be able to, for lack of a better word, manage their minds or control themselves, know when to speak and not to speak. And that's a functioning of intelligence that actually have, as I understand the world, is something that's a very personal thing. It's not a transpersonal thing. So, I mean, to make or for the sort of field to express itself doesn't just happen automatically. I mean, otherwise we'd have a perfectly organized world. It's a messy, scrambled egg world. So yeah, it's sort of, I'm not so sure that I understand why it's a topic that keeps emerging. To my mind, it's just quite self-evident. Yeah.
Well, I can tell you a little bit about that because, and so in my own arc, I I kind of had the notion of communication as kind of the essential feature of my life. The exploration was essentially about communication and communing and community. Just the connection with other people. And so in stepping into that, what began to form both outside me and within me was the notion that I knew something that was other than what other people could know. And so a kind of projection that I would say, psychologically is a father projection or spiritually is a guru projection. And as that began to develop, both outside of me and within me, I had to face it within myself and understand what the structure of power, which I had used perhaps to, like, cover over certain attributes of my own being that I didn't really want to deal with. If something's uncomfortable, I could simply overpower the circumstance rather than feel into the discomfort. So, and that there was something that was really tasty about people thinking I was cool, right? So there was something that was intoxicating within my own system, and it was reflected in people outside of me thinking I was something. So as that became clear to me, I began to communicate that, like, this is not true. I don't have something you don't have. You have as much as I have. Like, what do you want to do with it? Well, that just became, oh, he's so humble. He's an amazingly humble guy. Like, it just got absorbed into the projection over and over again until, there was some years in Europe where I was meeting with groups of people where I literally wouldn't say anything. And that became, wow, he's amazingly quiet still and all that. So for me, it's a deconstruction of that, both within and without. Now, having kind of thoroughly done that, the dialogue space that I'm currently in, both online and in person, is very diffuse. It's very open, and people can, narcissistically occupy that space with their own story, and other people will then experience irritation or boredom, as Sapir pointed out, right? So then you can say, okay, well, that's their work in that space, is to pay attention to what their mind is generating. Or you could say, this is a total waste of time. And as you're pointing out, a person who could focus that and sort of clear the space over and over again would actually be valuable.
Yeah.
And so I'm really looking at that same question again and saying, is there a way to be in that space as the tent pole that you're talking about, without that becoming an identity either for myself or the people within that tent? Is there a way to do that? Or is it that the people who are not able to be still in their own mind or self-reflective need to do something which is process-oriented to occupy them until that space occurs, and then they can enter into what we're talking about as dialogue now, like almost a two-track thing. There's some people in Boulder that want to produce a kind of intensive space where people would explore the body-mind and perhaps to find a space where they could enter into true dialogue. So this is what's kind of the conversation that's going on right now. And I'm not sure what emerges from that. But I do hear what you're saying, and I don't think you're inaccurate. Like, it is a messy world we're in.
Yeah.
And I don't know that my vacating my natural state is the response to that. It may be like what Alex is saying, is for each of us to really find our natural state, but to understand that it's all provisional. It's a function. It's not an identity. And that does require at least a community of people who can call each other on when it becomes an identity and begins to distort, particularly around power structures, particularly around male and female. There's so many things that we can get caught in that a community can see more easily than a person, And so that's kind of my current reflection on that question. But I am taking that really seriously at the moment.
Yeah. What I've been thinking about a lot is just not necessarily coming together with no agenda, but if there was a problem to solve, like a really messy problem that's gone unsolved for a long time. Like, something I'm busy getting involved in is the whole African urbanization problem, which I'm not going to go into now, but I sort of feel like there's lots of people with lots of different skill sets and different like specialities, and that a process like the dialogic space would be an incredible way of actually harnessing all of that into some kind of a you know, what is the solution that is sitting in the dialogic space but hasn't been accessed yet. But that's something slightly different to just meeting without an agenda and saying, look, we don't know what the problem is. We're trying to figure out what the problem is in terms of human communication and why we can't all just live peacefully together. Yeah, it's you know, like Alex, I've been quite profoundly like affected by, not affected, that's the wrong words, but this Ian McGilchrist, who talks about the different hemispheres in the brain, and you know, there's so much, and sort of how the Western world, don't know why I picked it, well, I do know why it's the Western world, is sort of been hijacked by the left hemisphere, which is linear, logical, you know, all the stuff we talk about, mechanical. So, you know, you effectively bringing a whole lot of people into a room or into a space like this who's, you know, it's pretty well researched, and it connects with my experience as well of the world. You're bringing a whole lot of people whose actual brain architecture is not you know, just even on a hardware level is not suited to a logic space. So, you know, if you think of the problem going down that deep, anyway, I'll just draw the line there, I think. Thanks.
Okay. So I was saying, Mark, I really get what you're saying, and I can relate to that. And I'm one of the people that's accused quite often of putting you up as an expert, Stephen, and also of interrupting with whatever's passing through my mind, whatever song. What y'all don't know yet is those songs are real intuitive, you know, we need to pick up on them. But anyway, I like what you're saying, Mark, and it's kind of on the edge of let's do something, and it goes right back to what you said today. Well, okay, we understand this. Millions of, not millions, but lots of people understand what you have discovered on a really discovered inside you, Stephen, that we're all in this oneness, or you know, and so then we keep talking about it. But I think my question that actually I was going to bring up next time you brought up, Stephen, how do we live it? We know it. Most of the people that come because they've read your work, Stephen, and know it, but how do we live it? And I could see that our coming together could be that focus. And then, Stephen, I would see you just living it as you are, not trying to be or not be the expert. And people would say to me, Linda, come on, shut up, you know, instead of waiting for you to say it. Like, you do it in such a nice way, you know. And but I got two of my greatest learnings from being out there myself when you said, you know, whatever you said about me. And the first one, when I interrupted everybody and you said, you don't exist, you know, it's like, oh yeah. You know? So if we were honest in this and didn't let somebody just go on and on, blah, blah, it could still be a space for everything, but we have to be honest with each other. And you have to be who you are, Stephen, and your perspective and what you know already. And you are one of the few people I know, besides Ramana Maharshi and a few other people, that live from that space. Maybe, who is it? I don't know. There's another guy everybody's always talking about, but that just like you're in it. And that doesn't mean you don't get mad or do this or that. And I'm learning to live in it. And I want to live in it here too, in this space where we all meet. And I think it's great that we've gathered around your work, Stephen, because it speaks to us. And I think it's great what you're wanting, Mark, not to pitter patter around like I do sometimes, but somebody has to bring it back together. And I hope we continue this group on a weekly basis, in addition to the other one, and you could interview other people or us, or we could interview you. And it's very important to me to come together with you, Stephen. And when you were gone that one time, of course, it was an opportunity to say, why does everybody always blah blah with Stephen? And I think it's natural because that's why we came. So we just said, well, go to another group where he's not there. So it's very different, though, being in a group with you.
What do you say, Sapir?
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I'm unmuted. I was more interested to explore that because you connected looking up to authority with looking up to the mind or looking up to the known in general. And yeah, I'm interested if we can move away from that abstract seeing of that situation to more practical, like what does it look like? And, for example, you had this example of maybe I'm finding commas in a manuscript. So let's say I have this task or any other task, like I'm trying to work on my relationships, I'm trying to work on my finances, any task that we do with our mind usually. And I can put my interest on that task. Let's say it's going to take 6 months of my time. So like from today until the next 6 months, I can sit and work on that task, in a way, be in the known and use my mind. And how can I now move my interest to the space of the unknown? Like, do I do it at the same time? Like, is there a way of finding commas in a manuscript from the place of unknown, less focusing on my mind? Or does it mean I go out of that space? Like for 2 hours, I sit and work, and then for 2 hours, I go for a walk and try to be in the unknown? Or like, does it mean I have to go for a 2-week solo hike to find the spirit animal, and that will be like my unknown? Like, what does it really mean? How can I move my interest to the unknown?
Yeah, that's the question. But so it really requires a reframing of what is important. Like there's a woman staying at the house here right now who's going to Naropa University, which is the Buddhist oriented university in Boulder. And she's under a lot of pressure to get certain papers in, and she's feeling a lot of stress and really having a lot of emotional issues around this. And the papers, of course, are on spirituality, in Buddhism. And so this question of like, and my question to her is like, why are you feeling stress around getting a paper in on basically how to be without stress? Like to investigate that. So I think the question is like, not that there's an answer to, can I be in the transpersonal space or the space of openness and find a comma that's missing, but rather if that finding a comma is creating a kind of stress state rather than a state of focus and interest and even joy. Like there's some people in the publishing company who actually, this is hard to believe, but they actually find joy in looking for the missing comma. That's like a place of focus for them. So for them, that is the expression of the big space. And for me, that would be torment. And so if I have the idea, because my mother was an English teacher, that I should be looking for missing commas, then I would be in this place going, oh, I'm in so much pain. How could I possibly be in the non-dual state? Well, there's a pointer there, which is, why am I doing something that's making me so unhappy? Well, it's because I want to please my mother. Okay, so then go into the psychological, or I want a certain kind of control. Okay, you go into the element that's showing up. So to me, it's not like, how do we do that? But when we feel that conflict, what is it pointing to? Because to me, we're always in the space which is the connecting space. And the intelligence of that connecting space is that when we're misaligned in that space, it shows up. It shows up as, a kind of quality of tension or pain or suffering. So you see what I'm saying, Sapir?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're experiencing ongoing pain and suffering, there's some structure that is like there's an assumption out of which you're living. And that assumption isn't in alignment with who you actually are. And that's, points to our, condition of mind, genetics, family, society. There's enough in our society, the way our society is structured, to keep us all suffering, really, because it's a society which is about isolation and materialism. And so, like, how happy could anybody be
Okay.
in
Yeah.
that
So,
world?
so showing interest towards the unknown doesn't mean that like the information that's in front of me, it's not enough and I have to go be open up to more unknown. It's just the information that's in front of me, but not based on my assumptions.
Yeah, yeah. And you can feel when you're doing something that's like, I don't know, that you're fully in, you
Mhm.
can feel that, right? And you can feel when you're doing something that's like not, that's full of conflict. So that's, and then, like you can take on spirituality to override that. Okay, I'm in conflict. Okay, I'm going to like meditate and become mindful and become expansive. The conflict is still there. Well, the conflict is that, I keep thinking about whether I turned off the running tub upstairs. And now I'm meditating and I don't feel that conflict, but maybe I should just go upstairs and turn off the tub before it overflows, right? So there's intelligence in the irritation, in the conflict, and it's pointing to something and if we follow the pointing, then we find the place, the source, but then we have to be willing to engage that, to go where we don't want to go, to feel what we don't want to feel. And that might be something in the range of process. I don't know. This is what I'm like, I might be coming full circle here to like, there's no time, there's no process, there's no meaning, there's just isness to, okay, that's cool, but most people are in process and most people are in pain in that process. So maybe there's some way to incrementally relieve some of the suffering so that they have enough space to actually see the isness, to feel the isness. So I think the next book is going to be doing something, returning to the spiritual search. Might sell better too, So I think we have to be open to the decay of our own notion, and that includes me. Like if my notion is you don't have to do anything, it's all there. Uh, that also has to be put aside to see if it's true.
I want to give an example of what Stephen was saying that occurred to me after hearing what you were saying, Stephen, previously. Is I've talked about, my boys and our business, and I'm always on to them about something or another. And somehow I started to look at me and others as, just one side or the other of the coin of personality. And then I started kind of accepting the other, the employee who was a bitch and stuff like that. And my son's saying, Mom, back off, back off, back off. I started accepting that and through that, saw that, I mean, just in psychological words, I was trying to control everything. That's my ego, trying to control everything. And, for good reason. I didn't want the business to fail, blah, 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 but they were saying, just back off, and I think I saw it the day that you kind of confronted me in your nice way, Stephen, about popping up with all kinds of things. And I finally just kind of said, oh, okay, have a little trust here in the other side or something, have a little trust and let go. So it was like, I think that's what you're saying, Stephen, through the process of living and the psychological process, looking at that too. And knowing that we are truly all one, that I'm not right and they're wrong and back and forth. It was an amazing conclusion to that too. And they have to remind me still sometimes, but it's and my son, one that has kind of become enlightened himself, he kept confronting me in a very harsh way. Just shut up, I'm getting off the phone now. And I had to then look at it but it's both, Stephen, what you were saying of being in the process. You're still in the oneness, but you don't know it somehow. And in the oneness, you know that you're not separate or different from that person. You're just taking the opposite view right then or something, It was just, so I don't know. I just wanted to say that as an example of think what you're saying, Stephen.
Okay, Alex, do we want to have any like feedback on the forum itself, or?
I would just invite people to, put out what it is you're interested in, put out what your questions are, put out, like on some level, I mean, it felt very interesting, like maybe becomes more of just like a group dialogue rather than, or something, I don't know. And that not from the sense of like everybody's sitting there on one screen or whatever, but like pointed questions that would kind of go back and forth or whatever. But that's just one thing I'm interested in. But that doesn't mean anything really.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. Does anyone have anything in particular that'd like to drop in this last minute or two? Or you can always write comments in the community conversation.
Yeah, maybe that's the thing. It's like maybe reflect on it. I think the original format was sort of a dialogue between myself and Lindsay, then myself and Alex. That was it, basically, and then lightly edited and put out as an offering to the world. And then it sort of became a little bit more interactive with people that were taking the time to tune in live. Reflect on whether this sort of more interactive space is more valuable, or whether the sort of the one-on-one dialogue with some interaction, or just the one-on-one dialogue with different people. What would be most interesting to you in the structure of it? Maybe just drop in there's comments that can be made on this specific event, right?
Actually, it would be better just to start a thread in. I'll start a thread in the community conversation area. Yeah. This usually ends up in the library, which doesn't really have a chat feature.
Okay, so then I can start that, or yeah, or reach out to Alex or me through some other means. We have all these different ways of communicating these days, and thank you really for your time. I know time is precious for everybody's life, and it was interesting. I hope it was interesting for you.